welcome to the Life podcast. I'm Dr. Hugh Coyne.
And I am Dr. Lucy Hooper.
What are we going to be talking about today?
Today, we are going to be talking about lipoprotein little a.
Mm-hmm.
It is a blood test that most people have never heard of, but it could be one of the most important blood tests you ever take because it is really, really important for predicting your risk of heart disease.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a little known cholesterol containing particle, but it is a big deal. And if your levels are high, your risk of heart disease or stroke and other cardiovascular problems can even double or triple, even if your standard cholesterol levels are completely normal. And we're going to be talking all about this. And I've been reading a lot of Mary Baird's SBQR History of Rome recently. So I'm also going to talk about the link between cardiovascular disease and the Praetorian Guard.
Exciting. I can't wait to see how those link together.
You often describe this as a little known cholesterol containing particle, but what the listeners don't know is that you spend many breakfasts and dinners talking about lipoprotein little a and how it's impacting our patients. And essentially, this cholesterol containing particle is a big deal. If your levels are high, your risk of strokes and heart disease and other cardiovascular problems like erectile dysfunction can double or even triple, even if your standard cholesterol markers are completely in the normal range. Now, I have been reading recently Mary Baird's SBQR, her History of Rome. And so I was going to talk a little bit later about the link between cardiovascular disease and the Praetorian Guard.
Okay, great. I know you love to add a little bit of history.
I love to add a little bit of
medicine.
history. I love a good analogy. I think analogies are a good demonstration that a doctor actually understands the concept that they're talking about. But also, the analogy can be really helpful in people understanding what's going on and about the condition or about the particle in question that is causing a problem. But I think also they add a little bit of fun.
Okay.
And I'm going to spare my stag do analogy for another episode.
Good.
Which,
good.
as you know, is my favorite one.
Yes, I do know it's your favorite. So let's get into it then and talk a bit more about what lipoprotein little a is, why it's so important, why I'm obsessed with it, and who needs to get tested for it. So let's talk about, yes, we're going to not talk about how to manage it or what happens if your level's high, because I think we could talk all day about that, but it's definitely a whole nother episode. So let's first of all talk about what it is. Like, what do I mean when I say lipoprotein little a? So a lipoprotein is a particle which you carry in the blood, which has cholesterol in its center. And then wrapped around the outside is another layer of proteins. So you can think of it a bit like a cream egg or a Ferrero Rocher, depending on your particular taste.
Okay.
So where that gooey
So
center.
What does the ambassador have to do with all this?
Yes. So that gooey center of your Ferrero Rocher is the cholesterol. And then you have this outer layer of particles of proteins that wrap around it. And they're really important because those proteins are what allows the cholesterol to get transported around your body in the bloodstream, from the gut to the liver and everywhere around your body. And that outer layer is really important in determining how much impact cholesterol has on your body. And lipoprotein little a is just a very special type of one of those particles because on its surface, it has these two proteins, which are apolipoprotein A and apolipoprotein B. And they're really important in making lipoprotein little a dangerous, aren't they?
That's exactly right. It's like LDL, with Velcro attached to it. That special combination is what makes it much more likely to stick to the arterial wall, where it contributes to plaque buildup, which is incredibly dangerous. And it also interferes with normal artery functioning, which may increase the risk of heart disease. So it's a little bit of a double whammy. Not only does it increase the risk of cardiovascular disease by getting into the wall of the artery and increasing the risk of atherosclerosis, so this plaque buildup, but it also interferes with how our body handles clots. So it interferes with fibrinolysis, so it means clots are more likely to form on the surface of these unstable plaques in the arterial wall.
And I think what's one of the most interesting parts about lipoprotein lysate is its genetic determination. So, so often when I tell people they have a high level, immediately they hear the word lipid and cholesterol, and they say, shall I cut, butter out of my diet, or should I lose weight, and things like that. And that's what's really special about this, is that actually it doesn't really change very much with things like diet, exercise, lifestyle. Your lipoprotein lysate level is mostly determined by your genetics. So if you've got a high lipoprotein lysate level, you're likely to have had that really for much of your life, from childhood onwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, of course, are the perfect example of this, Lucy. And you are the person that I often bring up in my consultations with patients about why lipoprotein A is important. Yeah. And the phrase I use actually is, you know how Lucy finished last in the genetic lottery. You got dealt a bad hand, and you got dealt a bad hand with the lipoprotein lysate, even though actually your cholesterol levels, your normal cholesterol levels, your LDL, your non-HDL, they're actually pretty good. So actually you didn't get all bad cards.
Yeah. Can I add that actually my cholesterol level might even have been better than yours?
Well,
not that we're competitive.
Not at all. I mean, and that seems improbable.
It does seem improbable. And yet it is true. It's totally true. I have really good cholesterol levels because of my excellent lifestyle, which is not perfect, but I do try really hard to be healthy. But my lipoprotein lysate level is shockingly high. I think the highest of all of everyone in the clinic. I think
you're
still
definitely
got
the highest female. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have the gold medal.
Yeah.
And I often bring that up. You're still top of the table.
And the thing is, I would have had no idea about that if we hadn't checked that specific blood test. So if I had just gone for a normal medical or screening test or health screening or something like that, then no one would have told me, oh, actually, you've got an issue with your lipids, because a standard cholesterol test won't pick it up. So it shows, you can have really perfect cholesterol markers and still have this massive risk factor there. I think there was a study published in 2023 that showed that only 1.8% of people, so less than 2% of lipid blood tests, included a lipoprotein lysate level. And that was in the USA, to be fair, where they are much, much more on it.
Way ahead.
Yeah.
So that begs the question, why isn't this test more common?
I know, and I have to confess here that, Hugh, you've been talking about lipoprotein lysate for several years, and I think it did take me a little while to come round to the idea of just actually how important it is. But you have been talking about it a long time. But I think in terms of it really becoming more common, especially in the US, I think Peter Attia has to take a lot of credit. So his book that he published, Outlive, there's a massive section lipoprotein lysate, and he's done tons of publicity about it. And I think that is certainly the first time a patient ever asked me about it directly themselves.
Yeah, and I often say it's really interesting because patients often walk in with Peter Attia's book Outlive, and they've often highlighted paragraphs in it and say, have you heard of this test, lipoprotein(a)? And of course, I would love to say, well, actually, I was talking about it years earlier, but
Yes. I think you should.
Yeah,
You should.
yeah, I'll take all the credit. Yeah, yeah, but I think actually that's been really important in raising the awareness, and it's been really helpful in people suddenly starting to ask about it.
I think it is helpful because I also, at the very least, it means that I might talk about it in a consultation with someone. Maybe they've vaguely heard the word before, probably not still, to be honest. I think Peter Attia has done really well, but I don't think that everyone has read his book. So it does often end up being a bit of kind of a back to school science lesson when I'm talking with patients. So, but it is helpful, they'll go away and they'll Google it and they'll read stuff and then come across his stuff and other people's writing on it. And it helps them, understand this is a real thing. It's not just kind of Lucy's pet project.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we're doing this episode. It's so more people actually know about lipoprotein(a) and can advocate for themselves to get tested and can go to their doctors and request this test. And it's incredibly important. I like to think about a little bit about why we have this molecule in the first place. And the way I think about it, so we've described that it is incredibly unhelpful at the moment, that it increases the risk of cardiovascular disease massively.
I mean, and for some people, just to emphasize that increase of risk of heart disease, and that's what we worry about. I will say to people, like, a lab number on a report doesn't mean very much, and it doesn't mean very much for your body, but it's what that translates to.
Yeah.
And it can translate to, say, doubling your chance of a heart attack or stroke in your lifetime. So it can be a huge difference if someone has a high lipoprotein(a) than a low.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does beg the question about why have we evolved over the millennia?
Yeah. So several primates and hedgehogs have evolved to have lipoprotein(a). And I think that's amazing because you think about why would a hedgehog have evolved to have lipoprotein(a) and why primates? And there is this idea that it is helpful in some respects, so that it has in some studies been shown to migrate to areas of tissue injury. So the idea is that it might help with tissue healing and repair. And this is where the idea of this analogy with the Praetorian Guard comes in. This idea of a crack force, if you like, a group that's going to come to an area of crisis, really come to the sharp end and be incredibly helpful. That's why we have lipoprotein(a) to come and intervene and help with tissue healing in an urgent and very immediate manner. And the Praetorian Guard was founded by Emperor Augustus in 27 BC for exactly this reason, to protect the emperor in a time of crisis. But in the end, they turned on the emperor. They turned on Emperor Caligula in 41 AD, who, to be fair, was wildly unpopular and known for his extravagance, his cruelty, and erratic behavior. And they murdered him in a conspiracy with the senators and the imperial family. And and I like the analogy with lipoprotein(a) and why lipoprotein(a) is much like the Praetorian Guard is that it was initially intended to serve a vital protective function, but eventually becomes a double-edged sword capable of turning against the very system it was meant to safeguard. A little bit like the Praetorian Guard, who were very like the normal Roman army. So lipoprotein(a) is like normal LDL particles, very like them. But its armor is difficult, is different, rather. Its armor is different, much like you were describing the much more gentle analogy of the Ferrero Rocher. The armor of lipoprotein(a) is different, and so is the Praetorian Guard. They had fancier breastplates, they had fancier helmets, they had slightly different weaponry to distinguish themselves from the normal soldiers of the Roman army. And that's a little bit like the way lipoprotein little a is. It is a dense molecule with a slightly different coating to LDL, but has similar type of constituents, but is much more dangerous. And that idea of it teaming up with the senators and with the imperial family to turn against Caligula is almost exactly the way lipoprotein acts in the arterial wall. It teams up with LDL and magnifies people's risk of cardiovascular disease. So the LDL and the lipoprotein little a both become liabilities. And that's why I think it's such a lovely analogy between the two. They are lipoprotein little a are a powerful but dangerous presence, much like the way the Praetorian Guard was.
Yeah, so it's definitely that combination that's important, isn't it? It's what that particular combination of those proteins on the outside, what it does to the ability of that LDL cholesterol to cause you problems in your blood vessels.
Yeah.
I mean, people have estimated that it might make each normal part of LDL cholesterol you have maybe 5-6 times as harmful or sticky or toxic, however you want to phrase it, but that it definitely has a strong multiplier effect on just how dangerous it is for you. So, that's why we're so passionate about testing people for it.
So who should get tested for it?
So the European Atherosclerosis Society, they recommend that everyone get screened for lipoprotein little a at least once in their lifetime. And that recommendation came out a couple of years ago, to be honest, but it's been quite slow on the uptake. Definitely anyone who's got any reason to especially worry about heart disease. So I mean, people where there is a family history, especially people who have a family history at a young age, people who themselves have had some kind of heart problem, heart attacks, stents, strokes, especially if their cholesterol wasn't very high. And people that know they have a high cholesterol. So a number of people who have other causes of a high cholesterol, which often are genetic, they often will also have a high lipoprotein little a level. And of course, if you know, like we said, it's genetic. And what we mean by genetic is we mean you inherit that level of lipoprotein little a. If you know someone in your family has got a high lipoprotein little a level, then that's really important information 100%. And you should definitely get tested. Yeah. And we've seen, we introduced it to health screening a bit over 2 years ago now. And so we've seen lots of people get tested and a lot of them fit those groups. Some of them didn't fit any of those groups at all, though, and it was a complete surprise. But a lot of them have some kind of risk factor in terms of those groups. And it's really interesting looking at families. So, it's the lovely thing about family practice is that we look after lots of people from the same family. So you get to see the different levels of lipoprotein little a. And it's not black and white. You will see in a family, maybe siblings where one person is 150, another's 200, another's 300. But there is that tendency in the family to have a higher level.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm really interested in the differences across different races as well, because there's it's more or the pattern is different in different races, isn't it? In that in white populations it's more of a heterogeneous spread, and so people are much more likely to have a much lower level of lipoprotein little a, and then there are a few outliers with very high levels. And in Afro-Caribbean populations, there's a much more sort of homogeneous spread across those low to high numbers, whereas in white populations, there's a big spike in the normal range. There's much fewer outliers, which again sort of speaks to different genetic pressures that different populations will have been subject to over time. One of the things that I think is really good about lipoprotein(a) is that it sounds incredibly complicated, but there is good news, and that is the testing is very simple, isn't it? It is just a simple blood test. No need to fast, and really you only need to do it once because the level stays fairly stable throughout life because of that thing that you were talking about, the genetics.
Yeah, it does stay pretty stable for most people. There are a few cases where you can get some quite erratic levels. Certainly around menopause, we do see a little bit of variation there happening. And if something else serious is going on with your health, like serious kidney disease or something like that, you can see levels change. But for most people, it's going to stay ballpark in the same range, i.e. being low or normal or high over that person's lifetime from maybe 5 years of age, 8 years of age from childhood onwards. It will stay pretty stable.
Now, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but can you explain to people why does high lipoprotein(a) increase risk? How does it do that?
Okay, so you remember this Ferrero Rocher with the cholesterol in the center. So that's
With these Ferrero Rocher, you're really spoiling us.
Yes, exactly. So that cholesterol is the thing that can cause these plaques or buildups in your blood vessels. And what can happen over time is as cholesterol builds up in the wall of your blood vessels, the tube of the blood vessel starts to get blocked up, which can cause symptoms. So that can cause people to have like angina or chest pain if it's affecting the heart. And then also you can then sometimes get where one of those builds up suddenly bursts, or we call a rupture of the plaque. And when that happens, you will often get then a clot in that blood vessel. And that's when you have a heart attack. So we say, heart attacks feel like they are a very sudden thing for most people, but actually biologically that process of cholesterol building up in the wall and getting a bigger blockage before it ruptures, that long process is typically many years, decades over time.
And that's a really important point as well to make, isn't it? Because heart attacks are years in the making, but often the first symptom that people get that they have cardiovascular disease is a heart attack.
Yeah, for a big chunk of people, the first time they'll ever know about it in terms of feeling a symptom would be something like a heart attack. But so how the lipoprotein(a) impacts that risk is that those particles, those lipoprotein(a) particles, they are really good at getting that cholesterol into your blood vessel wall. Because if it's just in the bloodstream, it doesn't really do very much harm. But once it starts to get into the walls, cause those blockages, that's when you're at risk of really serious disease. And the lipoprotein(a) particles are very good at getting it into the walls and making lots of nasty inflammation and blockages in those walls when they get there. So that's why people talk about it like having Velcro on your cholesterol, making your cholesterol stickier. These different nice analogies, not quite as exciting as your Romans.
The Praetorian Guard who are insiders, that's how they get in.
But
cause damage.
These different analogies of trying to explain why having a high lipoprotein(a) is really harmful and how it translates to having a much higher risk of cardiovascular disease like heart attacks.
So that's one aspect. It's increased atherogenicity, as we would call it. What about the other side, this increased clotting risk that comes from lipoprotein(a)?
Yeah, so we know it doesn't just increase the blockages, that it also seems to be inflammatory. So it causes more inflammation in those blockages, and that it possibly may cause more blood clotting to happen there. There's still, we're still learning about that and learning about risk. And I think there's probably still some debate of how much. And it certainly doesn't cause blood clots in the way that we often understand it. So in terms of things like a DVT, so, those deep vein thrombosis, blood clots in the legs and things like that, there isn't a worry from that point of view. But at the kind of really microscopic level, it may make more clots happen in the blood vessel itself.
Yeah, and although it's not widely known that this is a problem, lipoprotein a is not a rare issue. 1 in 5 people have elevated lipoprotein a, and most of those people have no idea that they have it.
Most people have no idea. I mean, and, you and I, we see people all the time that have been through, some of them been through quite serious heart disease, some of them seen, some of the best cardiologists in London, and still have no idea that they have a high lipoprotein A, and that's a really significant issue that they need to know about and addressed. So yes, it's not rare. It's the knowledge of it is rare, shall we say, but itself, having a high lipoprotein A is relatively common, about 1 in 5.
So you found out you had high lipoprotein A. What next? Is the next step just panic?
No, never panic. There are lots and lots of things that you can do to reduce your risk of heart disease, even if you have a very high lipoprotein A like me. I mean, I think we should do another episode and really talk in depth about that, because, like I say, it's such a common thing, but there is lots and lots that we can do to reduce risk is the real message.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the meantime, if you have a family history of heart disease or strokes, or you just want to be a bit proactive about your health, you should absolutely ask your doctor for an Lp(a) or lipoprotein A test. It is a one-time test, and it could be life-saving.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think, it's so important. I wish everyone would get tested, because heart disease is still the number 1 cause of death in the UK, cardiovascular disease. So if we can find things that can help us pinpoint people at risk and improve them, that's just amazing.
Most importantly, can I still eat Ferrero Rocher?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So
Glad to hear that. That's the most important takeaway from the podcast. Much more than all of this massively increased risk of heart disease. That's been incredibly helpful and useful. I think really great to go into and explain that in a bit more detail. And we should definitely talk about how to manage risk next time. And I hope it's been helpful learning all about lipoprotein A, Ferrero Rocher, and the Praetorian Guard, and poor Emperor Caligula. And until next time, stay healthy. Let me see you soon.
Stay healthy. Thank you.